Thank you very much for your generous introduction and invitation to Duke, which I've really enjoyed. It's absolutely gorgeous place, and I find it difficult to leave. Yeah, so this is based on 3 papers that I've written and published with Tom Baker at Penn Law, and we're looking here at insurance as governance. And specifically insurance as criminal governance, and possibly here a failure of insurance as governance when it comes to the ransomware ecosystem. So I don't need to say much about the ransomware epidemic. Everyone is aware of the dangers of leaving your credentials lying around, clicking the wrong link, open an email attachment from a very promising looking PhD applicant, etc., etc., etc. It's big and it's growing. They're thinking by 2040 we'll be at 265 billion in costs, possibly more. However, it's something that's insurable, and therefore maybe it's not as much of a problem as we might think it is. The average initial ransom demand at the moment is $1 million. Very few people pay that average initial demand, but nonetheless there it is. But what you can see from the average cost per corporate breach, the ransom isn't the main thing. So there are all sorts of other things going on that are driving that cost estimate of the ransomware epidemic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about insurance as governance, and then I'm going to at least ask the question of whether insurance as governance has failed in the circumstance where we clearly have an escalating problem. I will look at the history of ransomware, and I will locate it in an ecosystem that tries to contain it but might actually be feeding the beast. And I will end up with some ideas of how things might be improved. So just a quick primer on insurance as governance. Most economists think about insurance as risk transfer. You know, you take risk from people who've got a highly concentrated risk and you spread it amongst other people who are more able to bear it or that are able to pool lots of risk. This is the sort of arrow idea, and lots of mainstream economics has taken that up. But in the 1970s and 1980s, we get these economic sociologists work shadowing what insurers are doing, and they find that they're actually doing a whole lot more than that. So Carol Heimer, Lawrence Ross, etc., they're saying, okay, these guys have got a real incentive to prevent losses. They've got to be really careful about who they insure. So they have massive adverse selection problems, and they've got the problem of moral hazard, that insurance makes people careless. So they need to be very careful about what it is, who they insure, and what exactly it is that they insure them for. And I've just written a paper on marine insurance, which is the origin of all commercial insurance, and they're meeting all of these challenges there for the first time, and they very quickly say, well, I'm going to insure you for this journey, calling at these ports, with this ship, in this particular state of repair, with this captain, and off you go. And if you deviate from that route, you're not insured. Further, so things happen. I mean, that's what insurance is for. So if things happen, they have every incentive to reduce the amount of loss that they're actually covering. And they do that through design. You know, what is a good design for a hull if you're going into the Arctic? So Lloyd's of London makes Arctic classes and saying this is the kind of ship that will be able to survive a collision with pack ice, and if you don't have that, then you're not going to go into pack ice. There's best management practice. They might have extremely good salvage mechanisms, and again, Lloyd's and its open form for marine insurance is really exemplary of this. A Lloyd's agency that makes sure that ships don't get needlessly abandoned and that the salvage operation comes in as fast as possible without a long discussion about the price. It's a fixed price. Then there is the question of recovery. What do you need to do to get your business back back online? In the case of ransomware, back to where it was. Lawrence Ross is really interesting on car insurance and the conflict resolution side, saying it would be absolutely uninsurable and terrible if every road accident had to go through the courts. Therefore, we're going to bypass the entire legal system and basically work on the basis of sort of no-fault insurance. So we see that over and over again. The insurance just says the state isn't working for us. We can make a better system that works, that mitigates the insured losses. And insurance also tells the state when things have got out of hand. Yeah? And they say that by making war exclusions, for example, that this is not possible. You know, we can't do terrorism, we can't do state-sponsored violence, we can't do war. And then it's up to the government to come in and either co-insure or solve the problem with a naval intervention if you're talking about Paris. So I think this is something that is not seen enough, all that clever order and institution building that comes from insurance with that highly concentrated incentive to solve problems across the board of the insured. So my work mostly looks at insurance as crime governance, and that was something that was completely new when I was first looking at this problem, so 2019, 2020. I think they were quite shocked when I said, you guys rock, you govern this market. And they just said, no, we don't govern crime. And I said, oh yes, you do. But there is so much going on because it's that same incentive to mitigate whatever you've got insured. So you can strain your customers in the risk taking. You can do that in two ways. You can tell them what to do, or you can stop them from doing stupid things by getting the government to regulate that every car has to have an immobilizer, for example. You can't get a car without an immobilizer anymore. So sometimes you just constrain choices that way by building in security solutions. And we've seen this as well with online crime, cybercrime. What I find perhaps more interesting is when they start engaging directly with the criminal underworld by changing the costs of committing a crime, but also the risks of committing a crime. As Mike was saying, I've got a book on what's called the Art Loss Register, which makes sure that anything that has been stolen is registered on that database, will not be sold at any reputable auction house or gallery. So every time a stolen piece of art emerges on the art market, there's a chance to grab it back, to find out who's got it and why they've got it and where they got it from. And that changes incentives for criminals to engage in this particular form of crime. There's also the question of how profitable is it? Yeah, if you can't sell stolen art on the art market, as was possible 30 years ago, you have to sell it back to the original owner, and then you're only going to get a finder's fee, which might be 10% of its value and might be a lot less the closer connected you are to the crime. And there's also always very clear a sense of we need to protect value here. Yeah? So the idea that people run off with paintings under their arms, you think, oh, how difficult would it be to just nail the frames to the wall? It's not rocket science. However, from an insurance point of view, rather they took the painting with the frame if they've got that far, because if they try and cut it out, the insured loss will be the total value of the painting, because it's going to snap and rip. And yeah. So there's always this weighing up of what's worse. So if they get as far as that, we went through the resolution process. Because the resolution process is cool, we'll get it back. It might take 20 years, but it'll come back. So there is recovery and salvage protocols, and often insurance as criminal government just takes the entire thing away from the insured and say, let's deal with this. Yeah, we'll deal with it. You tell me what you want back, and we'll get it back for you. Because you don't want people to do a DIY solution, especially if you're negotiating with the criminal underworld in a one-off situation. You want to bring the long time horizon into this. And finally, insurance as governance. Sometimes, and I think this should be recognized as a proper mechanism for mitigating insured losses, is to hand risk back to the insured. Yeah, they're just putting in a limit. Yes, we will insure you, but only for up to $1 million or up to 30,000 or whatever. So you still got a problem. Or exclusions where they say, let's just hand this over to the government. So these are the ways that I have found insurance as governance operating. So you could also look at it in terms of levels. You've got what's happening at the customer level. You help, first you select customers, you select the activities, but then you also manage the resolution and the recovery. But at the system level, there is that awareness of what are the problem C areas, what are the problem postcodes, where should people not be going, etc. And the security systems. It's really interesting when we look at car insurance, for example, and the way that insurance has come together to give us immobilizers, all the various car keys, tracking systems, etc. It's that bundling of risks that makes them think, okay, we can do this better. We can help people be more secure, and even if they don't want it, we'll make sure it gets built in. There are institutions for salvage. They might use their relationship with the government to get things regulated for, but they also often pay for law enforcement. So, for example, the British financial system pays for a whole unit within the Metropolitan Police to deal with card fraud. So it's a way of bolstering what resources the government is willing to give. And as I said, government backstops and co-insurance as a way of telling governments where things are going wrong and should be working better. Mike already mentioned my book on kidnap, and this is where I first started looking at the system and recognized that as a system, it's a polycentric system and lots of different specialists contributing to the prevention and to the resolution of crime. But at the bottom of everything is a law, and that law says employers have a duty of care towards their employees. Without this, none of the system would work. So if you send your employees to Colombia, if you send them to the Niger Delta, if you send them to Somalia, you have a responsibility to make that as safe as it possibly can be. Not completely safe, but as safe as it can be. So what you're insuring yourself against is both the possibility of kidnap, but just as much the possibility of being sued by the hostages after the kidnap has happened and resolved. So we have these people who come in with their security audits. They give very strong advice on what is possible, what's not possible, under which condition it is possible to operate a gold mine in Mali, for example. They're also very good at organizing protection contracts with whatever rebel group or informal protectors, underworld organization is actually in charge on the ground. So kidnap insurance effectively is an insurance for something that doesn't happen. If it happens, there's this really excellent plan B, a crisis response plan, where the negotiation of life of the hostage is conducted by specialists, mostly ex-elite military people, really calm and say, this is the way you can do this, and I've done this 100 times and I've never lost a hostage, and don't lose your nerve. Yeah? Don't reward bad behavior. It keeps people safe, but the other thing that it does, it really disciplines the ransoms, because it's not in the insurer's interest for people to throw money at the problem and thereby create a massive boom in kidnapping. You might already think, well, maybe something has gone wrong in the online world here. There's also a problem of delivering $30,000, $100,000, $1 million in a hold-all into tiger country. So again, that's probably something you don't want to do on a DIY basis. So again, we have specialists, and then you have to extract the hostage from tiger country. Again, you probably want to have a plan for that, and then you want to debrief them. And there's also very strong cooperation with law enforcement, and that runs two ways. It's the one of, please don't do anything, we've got this. And then we've got the hostage back, and if you want to do something, that's exactly where they are. Yeah? So it's really, really cool. So, and now to ransomware. And everything that I've described to you as really cool just now seems to not be there. So, there's very limited mandatory security. And there are some basic ideas of what cyber hygiene means. But nobody really checks whether that's being implemented, either before or afterwards. There's a tendency to pay out. It's a very competitive market, and nobody wants to upset any customers at this stage. So generally they said, yeah, okay, you probably shouldn't have done that. That was really stupid. But here's your money anyway. What they do is they're focusing on efficient recovery. So they're trying to limit business downtime. And that means that they pay the ransoms really quite fast. Yeah, so rather than this disruptive bargaining where you say, yes, you got my wife, but if she comes back at Christmas, that's plenty early. Here we're trying to pay as fast as possible. There's a culture of secrecy. You don't want to report that something has gone wrong. If you can make the problem go away before anyone notices, that's what you want to do. And some people say this is a conspiracy, but they're trying to create a market here. I don't think that's the case. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think I might have some explanations of what is going on here. And the first thing that we noticed when we're starting to interview people about ransomware and the way ransomware is insured was that there is no ransomware insurance. What we have is cyber insurance. So it's a whole broad range of things that are being insured here. So this is 1990s, where people starting to see that there are problems associated with an online presence, with using the internet, that there are bad actors and funny actors and seriously bad actors, and so lots of people are starting to look for various things that they need to insure against. So negligence, product errors, failure to perform if you're selling software or hardware, copyright infringements, which is all of us using pictures like that, but we probably ought not to, privacy breaches, and then all those security issues around viruses, worms, pranksters, and criminals. And if you look, and if this is visible enough, what you see that this is largely a third-party insurance. This is a liability product. It's not crime insurance as such. What you're insuring against is the downstream effects of having been hit by crime. And I draw your attention specifically to the privacy breaches, because we get all these legislation around companies not taking enough care with their customer and supplier and patient and student data. And the government goes really hard against that and says, if you don't take care, then we're going to hit you with punitive damages. So let's think about this from a product design point of view. It's a little bit like selling insurance against armed robberies. And the government saying, well, whatever you do, do not bleed on the carpet or on the pavement. If you spoil the sidewalk or the carpet with your blood, we're going to make you so sorry that the original infringement on your physical security will seem like a walk in the park. Yeah? Whatever you do, you must not bleed. Privacy breaches are a bit like that. Yeah? Whatever you do, you must not bleed data. So if you're insuring against that, it's the bleeding you're worried about, not the crime. So this is the background against which cyber insurance is designed. So what we have is a puzzle. Yeah? We're trying to get companies online. Yeah? The internet is the lifeblood of companies. But also that's where all the risks are. So we're trying to resolve that tension between security and connectivity and efficiency. Now, in a university context, if we're trying to run a good student service and our filter system filters out 70% of student complaints, then we've got a problem. Yeah? So ideally, when we're completely open and completely secure, we can't be that. And what insurance is there to do is to allow us to take risks. Yeah? So insurance is not designed to minimize the risk here. It's to facilitate a sensible amount of risk-taking. Yeah? So insurance, therefore, needs to apply market logic. And unlike kidnap for ransom and outlaws, the efficient level of crime is not near zero, because near zero means that you've switched off your internet connection. The other thing that they're doing quite sensibly is to build all these governance infrastructures to deal with the third-party liabilities, because that's the big cost. Yeah, everything else doesn't really matter. And yes, they do reward harm-limiting behavior, but basically security is not something that can be forced into the community of insureds through premium reductions, because it's just not worth it. Ransomware starts in 1989 with a really almost funny breach where somebody, an AIDS researcher, mailed out 10,000 floppy disks with this malware program in the hope that people would put it into their computer, and then he had an idea that he would restore their computer to good health for $189. But mostly it was a teacher lesson. Be careful where you put your thing. So it was as much a prank as anything else. It was a teachable moment, so to speak. And for the next 20 or so years, that's what ransomware is. It's a nuisance. It interrupts businesses, and there's obviously always the possibility that if somebody's somehow got into your computer system, somebody is going to sue you for breaching liability. So insurers get on top of this and say, well, okay, let's get resolution as smooth as possible. We need to get the company back online, and if that involves paying a ransom, so be it. We're talking about $189, we're talking about $300, we're talking about $500. That's not the problem. Yeah? The problem is the $10 million or $200 million fine for breaching privacy rights. So let's not worry about the ransom, but make sure that our customers fulfill all their regulatory obligations, and then let's shroud the entire thing under client attorney privilege by handing over all of this process to privacy lawyers. We're back where I was a few slides ago with a cool product, because people don't know how to do that. Yeah? The DIY solution here is not as good as what insurance can offer. So people don't need the insurance for the $300 ransom. What they need is the know-how and the right people to get them back online. So there's good demand for insurance. Insurance is profitable because it works. They can really shrink the costs, those third-party liabilities. And they don't need to worry about cybersecurity, because after all, that's what people are trying to get around by buying insurance. Things start to change in 2008, and really the game changer here is cryptocurrencies, because until then we're talking about postal orders mailed to a post box in Panama kind of technology, or gift voucher from Macy's, or phoning a premium phone line hanging on there for half an hour. That's not really something we can really make money. But once you get these semi-anonymous ways of paying things on the internet, ransomware's finally got that last piece of the puzzle where they say, yes, we can be paid. There's the Zeus Trojan. They're working very hard on private key decryption, especially because insurance is really good at responding and saying, okay, if you've just got one code and one decryption program, then we can just share. We buy it once. The other thing that's interesting, and I'm going to plug Jonathan Lusthaus' book, Industry of Anonymity, about the challenges of building firms in cyberspace, where the people who have the code that will get them into a company and encrypt start to outsource the breaking and entering and the cashing out, and we suddenly get a lot more ransomware as a result of that. Insurance responds to this explosion in ransomware attempts. On the one hand, by going back to the customers and saying, okay, you need to be more careful, and we're going to encourage you to be more careful. We're not going to be prescriptive, but we're going to encourage you to be more careful by putting more of the cost back into your court. And they're hinting to the government that there might be some exclusions that they want to be putting in. There are incentives towards criminals. So say you've got to be really good at encrypting, because otherwise we'll decrypt it ourselves. But you've also got to be really good at decrypting. We're not going to pay ransoms for people who leave us on their own. So when you look at these ransomware brands, you will find that they often have pretty advanced customer service departments to make sure that people who have paid the ransoms actually get what they need, because otherwise the model isn't working. So there's this reputation building process going on. There's a sharing of decryption keys, and once something has happened, there's this building back better. Sometimes they just say, okay, well, all of your computers are 3 years old anyway, or 5 years old, we'll just start again, and this time we're going to make it good. With all of these responses from insurance, it gets more and more difficult to produce good ransomware. So once they are in, they're going to really make money from it. And so sort of 2018 onwards, you see this escalation of ransoms, which looks familiar to me from a Somali piracy point of view, where for years and years and years, nothing gets paid, and then it's 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 12 million, really quite quickly. So this is from one of the really interesting and cool firms in this space. It's called Coveware, and this is adapted from their website, and they basically take the problem away from people, but mostly they work through insurance. If you call them up and say, Bill, I need help, I've had a problem, they say, well, I'm maxed out. Yeah? So the only way to access that company is through having insurance that has got a deal with them. First thing Bill and his company does is do what all of the kidnap for ransom insurance always does, which is proof of life, proof of possession. Yeah? Do you actually have my data? Is that data still alive? Is that something that you can decrypt for me? And this feeds into that reputation building. Yeah? And they are also really good. I mean, have a look at their blogs, etc. If you've got such and such a company, ransomware gang extorting you, these are the chances of not getting anything, so don't pay. If they feel that the data is alive and kicking, then they enter into a negotiation if the cost-benefit analysis comes out the right way. Sometimes you might want to restore from backup. They facilitate payments, and if they're facilitating payments, as a firm, you also have to make sure that you're not paying any prescribed organizations, so you're not getting in trouble with terror laws. And then it's getting the company back online. So it's all outsourced. It's the entire ransomware settlement as a service process, basically because people came to grief in all sorts of ways before then. The last generation, the current generation of ransomware responds to this higher level of alertness, better backups, etc., by exfiltrating data and threatening the company to use the privacy legislation against them. Yeah? Do you really want to have your students' gender at birth data out there? No, we don't. Yeah? So they spend some time within the company and find out what's the most interesting for people to have, to keep safe, and then they come back with exactly that extortionary threat. So what we have seen here is a hard market, a hard insurance market with rising premium and lower limits, again handing problems back to the insureds. but also, on the other hand, engaging with governments. Yeah? It's a big market, there are too many companies in there, they can't really work things through to get minimum standards imposed because there's always somebody who wants to grab market share. So they want regulation, they want better law enforcement, and they certainly don't want to be responsible for state-sponsored attacks. So far that hasn't really been tested in court, but it's an interesting thing to watch. So I promised you a ransomware ecosystem, or at least I implied one. So here it is. So I've looked at it from a pre-breach, post-breach recovery scenario, but it's more like a tin because post-breach is pre-breach in this world. But yeah, you start with an insurance contract that sets limits and exclusions. There is advice that companies can take, but they don't have to take. There are early warning things about zero-day vulnerabilities, things where we've just realized that we have a problem that has been exploited or is exploitable, that the bad actors know about. And then there's this post-breach phase where everything is under the umbrella of privacy lawyers, and the main focus is liability management. Yeah? So the evaluation, negotiation, and payment is always under the, from the point of view of minimizing the liabilities or the total cost, but if you've got the liabilities here and the ransom there, then you're going to look at the liabilities, not at the ransom. Plus, as I say, there's incentives for reputation building, which we do see coming out really strongly. Then there's the recovery, the recovery phase, getting the company back online, building back better, and if necessary, deal with lawsuits. And hopefully, so far not much has been litigated. Most of it is done in arbitration. So here are my takeaways from this research. This is something that's insurable. Yeah, so it's not a disaster. Most people make money from cyber insurance. Some people didn't, and that's a good thing. I mean, that's what evolutionary competition is about. People have bad ideas and the market selects them out. I wouldn't say that they've failed as insurance, as governance when it comes to security, because security has improved massively. However, so have criminals. So it's an arms race between computer security and criminals, and to the extent that insurers have been pushing for more security, there has been innovation around that. Sometimes I'm wondering whether ransomware isn't a way that we have trained criminals to engage in something that's less harmful than the alternatives. So what we've taught them is that if you do proper ransomware with good decryption and a nice customer service, that's better for you because we're going to pay you than just destroying the data. Yeah? So I don't know what China and Russia and North Korea would like to do, but we've taught them that ransomware is a way of making money from cybercrime. What could they do if they just stole the data? What could they do if they exposed the companies or the organizations for having been negligent with patient data, student data, customer data, suppliers' data? I think there is a problem in that insurance directs so much of its governance efforts toward third-party liability, and that's something that's completely artificial. Yeah? At the time when these punitive damages were instituted, the idea was that they're not taking proper care, but at the moment they're being punished for bad luck. And that seems a little harsh. Things will happen. Yeah? Cyber breaches will happen to all of us during our lifetime. It's not just the careless. So it's an appropriate adaptation to a legal environment that sets the wrong incentives. And the problem with that is it gives these really strong externalities. If I throw money at the ransomware gang, I feed the ransomware system. I like hard markets. Insurers obviously don't like hard markets, but I like hard markets because that's when we're seeing that Ostromian evolutionary competition in overdrive. That's where we see product evolution. That's where we see bad ideas being selected out. And what we have seen as a result of the hard market is a strong incentive, giving strong incentives for the insureds to self-protect. And the exclusions that have also arisen from the hard market engage the state, because the state's worried about taking on all these liabilities. So from a policy point of view, I think I would like to see a bit more government in this space, or at least I would like the government to move away from penalising companies for having been breached. And I'd probably like to see a bit more regulation and oversight on the pre-breach side. But I want to get away from this third-party liability thing here. I want a genuine cost-benefit analysis that doesn't take third-party liability into account when it comes to, do I pay or do I not pay? How much do I pay? Because if the threat is we're going to release that data, and you can say, yeah, well, do, so what? That's a completely different game. And also, if that is the case, then you can disclose. And once you've got disclosure, then we can really see the scale of the problem, and we can examine it, and we can see what we can do with law enforcement. So in the recovery phase, we probably need safe harbors for companies that don't pay ransoms. So a few conclusions here based on that body of work is that we shouldn't expect insurance as crime governance to minimize crime necessarily. What they're there is to facilitate enterprise. That's what their business is. That's their raison d'etre. What I find here is that the legal environment is driving the product more than the criminal environment, but of course they respond to both. And if the incentives are wrong in the legal environment, you create opportunities for crime. So if we have an insurance product that is not in the public interest, we shouldn't just say, oh dear, it's not in the public interest, but we say, okay, well, they're governing for enterprise. They're not necessarily governing in the public interest. So if it's a public interest question, then the government should come in. If they're not happy, then, well, go and get involved, go regulate. Yeah? Set the right incentives for insurance. Regulate corporate risk-taking if you're unhappy with where we are. And ideally, change the environment for criminals. So these are the papers that I've written with Tom on this, not just about ransomware, so this is a much broader paper on crime shaping insurance and insurance shaping crime. Okay, 45 minutes.
We have a little while for questions. Are there questions?
Thank you for bringing this cutting edge stuff to light. I know Peter Leeson, he wrote a book, Anarchy Unbound, and he talked about how pirates, traditional pirates on boats and all that, they innovated like constitutional political economy, so they had a lot of, like they introduced a separation of powers between like quartermasters and captains, and all of this anarchical kind of laissez-faire, bottom-up solutions to the different problems from not having like a state involved. Have you seen this happening from the criminal side of ransomware? Like, do you have like these kind of foreign adversaries kind of creating these new relationships or like innovations to avoid like shirking or cheating, something similar?
Actually, I had the same question, so if I can piggyback for a second.
Yeah.
One of the things that was great about her book about kidnapping was to describe a kind of gains from exchange. So I think it was FARC in Peru, but it doesn't really matter. It's expensive to conduct the kidnapping, then the negotiations are expensive. If you can cut out that stage, you can actually make a lot more money. And so it was just understood if you were going to operate in FARC's territory, you would pay the fee that would enable you not to have kidnapping. The problem here is that it's a commons, and that everyone has access to your computer system. FARC had almost a Weberian state where they could exclude others, and they could guarantee there would be no kidnapping, because if they didn't do it, no one would. When it comes to ransomware, isn't the fact that it's a commons means that everyone can, and so there's no way of making a deal like that. And so you have to go through the expensive part of actually having the ransomware put on your system and then taken out, which is a giant deadweight loss.
Yeah, I'm sometimes wondering who exactly Kaspersky Lab are, but that might be an implicit protection contract, that they are the people who could hack you, and hopefully they have the software that stop other people from hacking you. So there is a possibility, I think.
Norton, McAfee, these are just black hats turned white hats.
So I think there is something going on there that I'm not quite at the bottom of yet. But I see incipient protection contracts. They're not as good as the ones where you really have territorial control. But there is a business opportunity for somebody to offer meaningful protection. But yeah, you were talking about the organisation of the dark net firms. There is really cool research out there. It's by Jonathan Lusthaus, who's interviewed a lot of these people. The book is called Industry of Anonymity, and he's looking at exactly that. So I'm drawing on his research, but it's not my research.
So you introduced the concept of a hard market in this context. What exactly did you mean, and can you give an example?
So when ransom started to explode 2021, from 22, it became more and more difficult to obtain insurance, and the prices for insurance were rising. And the first conditionality started to appear in the market. But about a fifth of total providers in that cyber insurance market decided that they were not going to write any more cyber business for the time being until they could really see what was going on. And that made it difficult for people to get the insurance cover that they were seeking for the exposure that they had. And therefore it resulted in a retrenchment and a little bit more caretaking on the one hand, but also higher premium income and lower limits.
In this domain, is there a principal agent problem that companies have to deal with that result in the vulnerabilities?
There always will be. I mean, that's what the insurance is there to facilitate, that you can run a business. I mean, cyber insurance is really too broad. It's like electricity insurance. What business activity does not involve cyber nowadays? it's probably too broad, but at the time it was a product where people said, I don't want to make 20 different insurance contracts for all the possible things that can go wrong on the internet. So at some stage, insurers decided, I can give you one solution for everything. Maybe that's something that needs to be broken up, just as kidnap insurance is a standalone category, and then it can also create its own very specific rules and regulations around it.
We have time for one more question. Please, Samantha.
Is there a reason that the government doesn't promote get involved in the pre-war post-election candidate, or do they just like to the extent that they should?
There is government involvement, but governments don't always get the first pick of talent when it comes to computer specialists, because they don't pay nearly as well as either the black market hackers or the white hat hackers. They've indicted a few, so there is there are court cases. One of the problems is that these criminals are being sheltered by hostile states, so it's difficult to get people extradited from Russia or from North Korea or from China. It's a difficult space for governments to get involved at the cutting edge, and that ransomware task force was a way of saying, okay, well, we need to change something about the environment. We need to know more. So much of the knowledge is held by companies themselves and by insurers and by these ransomware settlement companies, but it's not being shared with law enforcement. But until they can change the legal environment to make that possible, they're going to be 2 steps behind all the time, at least 2 steps.
Please.
Okay, so we're working with a corporate risk-taking company. I want to know, how can that relate to like public interest? If a lot of people in our generation, we don't mind when our privacy is kind of taken. We like when we have a curated timeline. So to what extent can government regulate public interest if public interest really isn't for protection? Like, when is it a government issue or more like it's the public issue? Like, we should want more privacy. How can you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'm really pointing to is that this is a problem that's presented as a failure of insurance as governance. You know, so you're blaming somebody for a problem that they've solved privately for themselves, between themselves and their customers. And they say, this is not in the public interest. Well, insurance was never about the public interest. You know, so this is just saying, well, if you have a better idea, then please go ahead and implement it. But the system that we've created at the moment does not seem to be something that is helpful in suppressing ransomware. Quite the opposite. You know, so I'm just throwing that sort of accusation back and say, well, the system that insurance has created is a pretty good adaptation to the legal environment that you have created. So if you get the incentives wrong, and you find that the outcome is not in the public interest, then please get the incentives right. Yeah? But yes, it requires defining the public interest. But I would be really cautious about saying we must not ever have ransomware, because the alternative might be destruction or theft or exposure, and that's possibly not in the public interest either. So yeah, it's just a thing to say, well, think about what the public interest really is here.
All right, well, thank you very much.